has been talk and questions about what a dark empath is. What's the difference between an empath and a dark empath? And I've been studying dark empathy for years, and so I'll give you a quickish rundown. It derived from psychology, study of psychology, where they realized that there are some empaths that had like a dark side to them, and it's a negative annotation to it, a negative theme to it in its origins. And so psychologists realize that there are people that kind of use the empathetic qualities that you would see, call it like sensitive to other people's feelings, read energies, care about other people, but take that and put a dark twist to it. Someone who's manipulative, someone who can play games, someone who, will take your energies and sadness and, weaknesses and then twist it to kind of benefit them. And so again, it's like a gaslighter, a narcissist, but yet they have empathetic qualities. Like on the surface, you would see them as a really sensitive, empathetic human being, but they use it for their gain. They use it for their purpose, not because they actually care about another person. So as years have gone on, and as someone who has CPTSD and has gone through so many different therapy sessions, dark shadow work, I'm a spiritualist, realistic spiritualist. I became an ordained priestess, and I'm a very empathetic person. But my story, when I would read about the negative dark empathy personality and things that a dark empath would do in a negative light, I started to realize that I did those things, but I did it to survive a narcissist abuser. And so I realized that there's actually a positive spin to a dark empath, that it's not always a bad person who's a dark empath. So let me tell you a brief story of my life. I was in a very abusive situation, a relationship in my early 20s. This person gaslit me. This person abused me mentally, physically, locked me up and encaged me in every aspect of that. Whatever you could think of an abuser doing to kind of lock you in, this man did to me. So much so that as an empath, I was wanting to be a people pleaser so much, and I was so affected by the treatment that was done to me, but yet I had allowed so much to be done to me that eventually the trauma became so bad that I started to realize that I had to play their game in order to escape and survive. So I started to take my empathetic tendencies of being a listener, of caring, being very empathetic, but also playing his game better. So I would have a dark twist to it. I would play the game, his game, gaslighting, being a narcissist, playing these mind games in order to escape. So truly, a dark empath, if they find themselves, and it typically is born from a dark situation where they kind of had to use their empathetic skills skills in order to survive a really dark, traumatic situation. You have to play the game better than the narcissist. And so you actually end up becoming the narcissist, right? It's like something that is supposed to be a good thing ends up having to become a bad thing in order to escape. And I realized, I had to do some pretty dark things in order to win the game from this abuser and find my escape. I really had to hurt people. And many people in my situation have found themselves in that situation in life where they've had to really make some pretty hard, dark choices in order to escape something that they're locked in, something that they are trapped in. And many of us dark empaths live with a lot of regrets. And sometimes the tendency is when you've had to tap into that dark aspect of empathy, many times you can't get out of it. And then that's when it becomes truly a negative thing about a person. Because of some of the things they had to do to survive, to escape, to play the game better, that sometimes does such mental damage and trauma that they don't forgive themselves for some of the things they did, and they stay in a very negative, bad place. Instead of finding the light, digging themselves out of that darkness that they had to do to survive, to get out, but they have to get out of it. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of shadow work, a lot of therapy, a lot of spiritual, divine work to save yourself from that darkness before it actually consumes you and owns you to be that negative side of a dark empath. So I often will say that I'm a redeemed dark empath because I did have to do some pretty mean, horrible, manipulative things in order to escape my abuser. But I was able to heal my mind afterward, and I was able to find healing when I did escape. I was able to forgive myself for some of the things I had to do in order to survive. And that is something that is not really talked about when it comes to therapy, when it comes to trauma, when it comes to survivors. They're demonized for some of the things that they actually did during those kind of life situations. But you don't realize, but people don't stop and actually realize there's so much more to the story. There's a reason why a victim had to become evil, had to do some pretty mean things that's so unlike them in order to survive and escape a narcissist or a gaslighter or someone who really feeds off of empaths. And again, when I met this abuser, I was a very naive, empathetic, sensitive people pleaser. And he took advantage of that. And he mentally did a number to abuse and really fuck with my brain that it got so bad I didn't even recognize or know myself. I was a walking zombie. And then something in me clicked one day, and then it really became dark. I took my empathy, that light, and started to use it just like my abuser and play his games, but better, to beat him in this game of chess in order to escape. That is my story of what a dark empath is. And many times psychology will see it in a negative light, and that is because some dark empaths never get out of it. They don't get out of the darkness. Once they do and commit some pretty hard crimes, mental crimes, emotionally, whatever, they begin to feel like they're undeserving and that they remain in that darkness. Instead of forgiving themselves, realizing they had to do what they had to do to survive and escape, and then find the light again. So, dark empaths are people that play the game of a narcissist better, and they know how to manipulate an abuser in order to escape, in order to get revenge, in order to control all the cards and hold all the power. Sometimes that gets to their head. Sometimes that power gets to their head, and then they're not able to find the light. I had to find healing. I was able to dig myself out of that darkness. I was able to forgive myself.